Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Run with GM Espaleta. And today I wanted us to talk about transitioning to independent living. In the terms of why I wanted to talk about this topic, I think it's just not something that's been commonly discussed in social media or in mainstream. We've seen a lot of people starting to move out, having day in the life, whether it's on YouTube, TikTok, and the like. And I feel that maybe people in our generation, whether it's millennial, Gen Z, and the like, especially when you graduate, you kind of think about what it is that you'd want to experience, what it is that you'd like to have. And I think living in another place, living in a condo is really one of those top of mind things. I mean, you want to become more independent, you want to have more freedom, you want to have a place where you can express yourself. And I think with most Filipino families, to be able to do that, it's limited in terms of your living with your family. They have their own style, they have their own furniture, renovations, so on and so forth, right? And I want to share more about my experience in transitioning to a semi-independent way of living, living to a condo setup, and hopefully it could be helpful for people. So yun, I can start by sharing a bit more about like the rationale why I wanted to move. Why did I want to move? I always use age, I guess, as a reason in retrospect. Maybe it's just because when you adult and you start realizing after more birthdays, you're like, damn, I'm old. I think I need to be able to step up in certain aspects of things. And I definitely felt like that as I turned 28. Now I'm 29. So more or less, I've been in a condo for at least 8 years. Oh, 8 years. I mean, 8 months. Gosh. Sabaw. 8 months. And the rationale was fairly simple. I felt like we were transitioning out of the pandemic where it was a heavy setup of remote, and we were heading into a world where face to face was more common. I started getting tired of the routine, so to speak, of like the monotonous day by day waking up and not a lot of change of pace. There wasn't a lot of ways for me to express myself. I had a family setup where the furniture or the things I would have wanted weren't possible just because of the living situation. The space wasn't there, the room wasn't there. Had to take into consideration the arrival of my nephew, who's now born. God bless him. And there's just a lot of things I wanted to do that I felt like I couldn't. And I felt like I was at a point in life where this is the only moment I could do a setup like this, where I'm not exactly going to be fully independent, but I can be a bit semi independent. So just calling myself out there, um, don't cancel me. I am not a breadwinner. My experience is going to be completely different from that. I am someone who has been fortunate enough to have a family and parents who have supported me throughout my life so far, where I did not have to worry about expenses to the point that it would feel like a breadwinner. So I think that's the biggest caveat I would say. I can only share much of my experience, and hopefully in the future, we can talk about it with someone else to share their own experience of transitioning to becoming independent. How would a breadwinner transition to becoming independent? Is that possible? What are the paths that they're thinking about? So on and so forth. Anyway, that was my pitch. If ever anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. That's my rationale. I felt like I wanted a change of pace. My job was also becoming increasingly more face to face. Events were happening that we would organize in person. Relationships were very important in my job. I had to make sure that I could keep engaging with them. And at the end of the day, No matter how remote you get, no matter how great the systems are and the platforms are, if you're not able to connect with someone, it becomes difficult to even get the message. And I think meeting with someone face to face definitely changes that dynamic, definitely helps improve the relationship. And it was something that I felt like I needed to do more of. That's the general gist of the why I wanted to move out. In terms of the considerations, I think it's very important to be aligned with your financial aspirations and your financial goals. I think it's hard to diagnose or prescribe for anyone what those benchmarks are. But at least in terms of how I was thinking about it, I felt like I had a fairly good position financially speaking. I had an emergency fund just to cover any expenses I might have in case the worst happens, knock on wood. I had a savings and investments that could tide me over. And I came to the acceptance that in terms of financial goals, I felt like it would be better to be able to spend my money on quote unquote tuition, i.e., moving to a condo and bearing all the expenses that come with it to be able to help me have a better alignment in terms of values. Coming from like a middle class family, like I've said, having supportive parents, I've had a lot of things that were given to me, and I'm very grateful for that. But I felt like, in terms of a financial perspective and the budgeting perspective and the values perspective, I lacked a lot of skin in the game. I lacked a lot of experience and wisdom to truly know how expensive, how costly things are. And it was the hubris in me, I'd be honest, that I decided to push things through. I at least framed it for myself that it would be tuition. I was comfortable with the fact that my financial situation isn't gonna drastically improve or improve for any at all. At least if you look at the hard numbers, like if you look at this year or the past 8 months, if there was a percentage increase, I can't really speak for that because I was accepting that there wasn't going to be a change. And I felt like this movement, this experience was far more valuable than being able to just increase my total net worth by like what, 5%, 2%, 10%, whatever you'd like. And that's pretty much the things that you have to take into consideration if you do want to move. I really think it's the financial capability. I think it's important to make sure you have an emergency fund before anything else. Don't just jump into doing a independent living setup. I think that is a very dangerous thing, especially if you have family that rely on you, especially if you don't have a clear sense of how much you spend, especially if you're going to be working in a CBD area, a central business district. And there are just a lot of things that you have to think about. So, moving on from why I wanted to move, some things I had to take into consideration. Here are some of the curveballs and some of the things I really had to learn. I think first, it's just calling out again that it was a huge privilege on my end to be able to make this decision. I'm very grateful for, again, my family. It might sound like a broken record, but I really just want to emphasize that this was a huge privilege for me to be able to take this quote unquote education tuition and just jump towards it because I did not have any utang, debt, expenses, or things I had to pay for and on behalf of my family. I had no responsibilities or obligations. And I think it's just being mindful of that place you're in, financially speaking. Do you have any siblings who are younger than you? Do you have family who are getting older? Do they have any chronic illnesses that you have to take into consideration? Is the place that you're all living in a house that you own? Or is it a house that you're renting? All of those things. And I think it's being cognizant of that privilege or the lack of privilege to be able to help you realize where you're at. I think it's very important to know where you truly are because as parents or family, I'm sure that as you were growing up, ideally, they wouldn't want you to feel the weight of the world to be able to handle all the expenses. And it's helpful to start getting a baseline for yourself to be able to figure that out. And honestly, you don't even need to live independently for that. You just have to be more cognizant of how money moves in and moves out of your family and your household. The next thing I really learned was how much responsibility it is to be able to live independently. I greatly underestimated how much chores, utilities and bills, food setup, and just accountability of yourself was going to happen. Let me expound a bit. In a family setup, and it really makes sense why we have a family setup, at least objectively or utility speaking, is in terms of chores, you'd usually have it divided according to specific roles, specific time commitments, what you can do, even if it's just helping set the table for dinner or a meal, helping clear that out, helping sweep the room. Well, when you do move out, you do have to take into consideration that you're going to do all of that, likely. You're going to have to also do the laundry. You're also going to have to put the clothes. And you have to do all of these things. And the time it takes to do those, gosh, especially cooking and dishwashing, takes longer to do that than eating. Trust me. And in terms of the responsibilities you have to do there, it's just a lot that you don't expect head on. So be mindful of that, especially if you're someone who likes hoarding things or you don't really have a set rhythm or routine in terms of every Wednesday you're going to take the trash out, or every other week you're going to have to do a deep clean. Every month you're going to have to get something checked. I think those are some things you don't really take into consideration when you're doing the house. There's also the utility side and just the household itself, from paying for the electricity bill, the admin bill, water bill, whatever bill, even repairs that have to happen, appliances you have to get if you're going to a unfurnished or semi-furnished unit. If an aircon breaks, you have to buy an aircon, and even buying an aircon is an experience in itself if you've never done it. FYI, like you have to think about 1 horsepower, how much electricity does it consume? And I don't know about you, but I've never really learned about those things. So that was a lot to take in. A lot of information you had to digest, a lot of consultation of different groups or different people. If you don't own the unit, you have to talk to your landlord, the works. I kind of talked about it also, which is the food. When you live with your family, you really underestimate, especially if you're not the one cooking, how long it would take to cook the food, to plan the food. I can really understand now why you'd have like tinola or adobo every other day. And it's because of the amount you cook and the amount that's served more or less is not proportionate, at least for my family. And even just the time and expenses and effort to be able to cook meals, you can't always have a new meal every day. I think it was also a wake up call for me that since I did move out, there was a lot of gimmicks. It sounds so old, but a lot of gimmicks, a lot of meeting up with people, catching up, and you'll always spend a bit more. And it's gonna be a big, big hole in your wallet if you don't control yourself. So watch out for that. And I would say the last thing about responsibility is that accountability side of things, honestly. If you're sick and you're alone, how are you going to do the chores? How are you going to do with the food? Yeah, you can order Food Panda and Grab, but do you have the financial expenses to handle that? How will you buy medicine? What medicine do you even know to get? And those are just some things I really was in the bubble on, admittedly, and just learning those things, just be mindful, right? Like just be mindful that these are responsibilities that you're gonna have to take, especially you if especially you if you're gonna be alone. I think in terms of other learnings I've had, so one, it's a privilege, huge privilege, mind you. Number two, the weight and amount of responsibilities that you have to take into consideration. Number three, I would say, is the mindset. And maybe for people who've been more exposed to their family's financial situation, this might be something they'll scoff at or they'll be like, duh. But at least for me, again, middle class bubble, didn't really get exposed to the financial side of things. I'd say that I was really operating on a perspective of quote unquote thriving and abundance. And what I mean by that is I didn't really have to worry much about my financial expenses. I didn't have to worry about my bank account being zero. I didn't worry about having a roof under my head because all of those things were still fortunately covered by my family and very grateful for that. Emphasis on grateful. And what you realize is that the way you see the world is completely different when you know you have that safety net. In comparison to living a life of scarcity, when you say scarcity, it's you having to be more conscious with the resources, quote unquote, that you have because it's limited. Whether it's resources of time, money, energy, you name it. When you live in a world of scarcity, you're not able to take as much risks. You're not able to be as bold as you thought. You're not able to experience as much as you'd like. And I think that's a reality for people who are living in that world of scarcity. And each to their own, right? Each to their own, depending on their life stage. But I think that was a huge learning for me that the life I was living was very much based and covered for by my family. And now that I've gotten a taste of independence, it helped push me to realize all of these things of responsibility, my resources, what I can actually produce instead of looking at it in terms of the whole family unit, what I would want to support my family on. There are definitely goals there. And my relationship with how I see my family, my parents especially, with myself. And I really feel that I wouldn't have been able to have all of these learnings if I didn't pay for this tuition. If I didn't pay for like this 1 month, 8 months, 1 year, near 1 year tuition learning experience to be able to just realize how different things are as I transition to a world that is more scarce than I thought, given the resources I'm eventually going to have. I'm never going to be able to rely on my family as much as I did when I was in high school. They're getting older, and I don't want to be a burden to them, especially as they're nearing or are in their retirement age. I really wish that they could also enjoy the fruits of their labor, no? And I feel like being honest in terms of the life stage you're at, kumbaga, it's like Maslow's hierarchy, right? You're just being honest with yourself and realizing that, whoop, oh nga pala, I can't really do my self-actualization to the extent I'd want it to. I can't exactly go to a billion workshops from painting, art, dancing, sports, coffee, because there are some things like I have to put food on the table for myself. I have to be able to eat nutritionally healthy food so I don't get sick. I have to make sure that I work out and be healthy so that I can live a longer life. I think those things, those building blocks or those foundations are things that you take for granted if you live with your family. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you learn that, I think the more tempered your expectations are with reality, and it helps you think about how the world goes. I think now biggest thing that I see with myself is patience. Patience and focus. It's thanks to this experience that I've realized how hard things are. Again, super privileged. And for me to say, boohoo, it's so hard. I can't afford eating out compared to people who really have to survive or just can't even pay for whatever hospital expenses or breadwinner. Yes, I get it. I get it. Okay. But I think in terms of the patience and realizing how hard it is to make a living, especially if you are struggling, was very helpful and instrumental to ground me in terms of my expectations in life and the trajectory I can achieve. I guess it's just the reality that these are the cards I was dealt with, and I'm not able to change certain aspects of it, i.e., my financials, how much I have, how much I earn. But what I can change is the effort, the focus, the intentions I do. And I think it's something that people who realize this sooner can feel maybe better about it, because rather than feeling like this endless list of I should be experiencing these types of things, I should be going to vacation in Europe, I should be going to Japan, the beaches every month. But in reality, you have to tell yourself that, do I really have to do that? Is it sustainable given my current lifestyle and my earnings? Something I think about a lot now. And it's just the way we live in the world right now. And hopefully, that perspective is something that people can learn a bit sooner. If ever I do have children, it's definitely something where I would want them to live less in a bubble, live less of a sheltered life, to realize that this world, the world that we live in, has costs, and there are trade offs for the things that you decide to do. You can choose the life that you want to live, but only in relation to the resources that you have. I think that was a hard wake up call for me, moving from idealist to pragmatic, especially in terms of my life goals. So, yun, that's pretty much it in terms of what I wanted to share about my learning so far as I transitioned a bit to independent living. I'm going to be changing my setup sometime soon. We'll see how it goes. But I have no regrets in terms of this experience. I've learned a lot. A lot of money was spent here, a lot of time to be able to accommodate myself. But I would say that I really learned, and it was a really priceless experience and wisdom to be able to learn it at this age, especially as I, think about the future. And I hope it was helpful. If there are any questions that you might have about this specifically, any ideas or learnings that you might have had from your own experience, feel free to let me know. If there's any guests that you'd love to refer, feel free to message me and reach out. I'd really love to talk to someone who also transitioned some of the decisions that they've made, maybe tease out like the differences in terms of values, and also just talk about the realities of someone who is a breadwinner, not in terms of comparing, but just getting a sense of what life is like. So, with that, this ends our episode for now, but I'm excited. This was life giving. I hope it was life giving for you too. Until the next episode, kita kits. Bye.